Hello and welcome again to another episode of How to Avoid Murder and Other Awkward Situations. I am your host Dave, and with me always is the lovely Laura. And tonight, we're going to discuss something gruesome and something horrible. We may laugh, we may make some jokes, we use gallows humor here. It's not for the faint of heart, you may be offended. And if you're a delicate boy that plays the drums in an alt-rock band from Chicago, you will be offended. And you probably should listen to something else, something that decent folks listen to. I wouldn't know, because I'm not listening to it. And so, without further ado, let's proceed. Hello, welcome again to our show. This is your host, Dave. I'm not as lovely as my other host, Laura.
Thank you.
Really, your other host, not my other host. And we're here once again with a rip-roaring episode of How to Avoid Murder and Other Awkward Situations. And as you've probably noticed, we're mostly avoiding murder. We're not really focusing on those awkward situations, and we'll try and get to those sometime. But this is kind of exciting tonight. Laura's presenting, and it's going to be a so-called heavy hitter, a big name. We are going to do Sammy Sosa, legendary outfielder for the Chicago Cubs who murdered 44 people.
Little known fact.
I am eager to hear.
Okay, so, no. I'm a little hesitant to talk about a case that's so famous because I think people know a lot about him.
Is this your dad? Are we doing your dad tonight?
No, Nope. We're doing Richard Speck, and he is not my dad. But he did have a daughter. So, Richard Speck, as most people know, is famous for murdering 8 nurses. And that was like pretty much all that I knew about him. And so I'm hoping that it won't be too boring to listen to a whole bunch of details about him. Because the reason that he's so fascinating to me is that the scary part about it, and the part that relates to our podcast, is the avoid part. Because once you really read how it all went down, there were like so many near misses that it's just, you just want to scream at the players involved to do something different, like at a million different points, and it could have been avoided. But
well, it's funny, I feel like my whole life is a series of near misses. I'm constantly looking at people and thinking to myself, is this the one? Is this the one that's going to kill me? I don't know. So I'm hoping this will add to the paranoia.
Good.
I remember you mentioned you wanted to do Richard Speck, and I know a little bit about him. The details kind of are far away in my mind, so
yeah,
I'm eager to learn more. Just a quick question: did he go by Richard or did he go by Dick?
I think he went by Richard. I don't think he went by Dick. Maybe he went by Richie, but I didn't really read that anywhere. That I read a whole book on him. I watched a documentary. I read a whole bunch of articles and a whole bunch of old archived articles in the Chicago Tribune, which are pretty amazing.
It's the whole proper name thing, though. It's like people with certain names, like
and he had a couple different like middle names. Like he would go. His real middle name was Benjamin, but then he started going as Richard Franklin Speck at one point. But let me back up and start at the beginning when this horrible person was born. He was born in 1941 in a small town in Illinois. He was the 7th child to these very religious, teetotaling parents.
The land of Lincoln.
The land of Lincoln, indeed. His father was really, like, he had multiple jobs. They were really poor, but he always made time to spend with, his youngest son, Richard. He was a devoted family man, and he would take Richard fishing, and they were a close-knit family. And unfortunately for Richard, when he was 6, his dad died of a heart attack. And
sorry, Richard.
A lot of true crime people like to try to pinpoint the areas of people's lives where they start to go downhill. And so some might say perhaps this is like the first big bad thing that happened to him.
Well, okay. Now, was he the youngest, the oldest?
He was the youngest at that point. No, he wasn't. He had a younger sister, Caroline, when his dad died. So, but I think that she was the youngest. So there were like 8 kids in the family, and his older siblings were quite a bit older. So anyway, so he'd had this sort of close-knit religious family. They didn't drink. They went to church. So his mom, like, pretty quickly after his dad died.
Started drinking.
Married an alcoholic peg leg.
Oh, she learned from her mistakes.
Yeah. So she went in a different direction. She was like, that first marriage did not work out because my husband dropped dead in his 50s of a heart attack. So she turned around. She married this guy she met on a train. And he was a real piece of shit. He was like a petty criminal. I think he'd gone to jail for forged checks or something. And he actually had a literal peg leg.
Arrested for loitering on trains frequently.
Probably. Yeah, he was very abusive. So that was good. That was good for Richard. So Richard had started to have a hard time in school after his dad died. He was like eating crayons and crying all the time and kind of just regressing. Eating crayons. Which is making me kind of give the side eye to some of the kids I work with because I'm like, man, that kid is eating stuff he shouldn't be eating. And
hey, Dicky.
That's
Dicky
the
Speck.
first.
Put that grand down.
The first red flag on the road to killing. So, very shortly, after his mom gets remarried, she relocates with Richard and his younger sister from Illinois to Texas.
This is going from bad to worse.
It is.
She's all about making...
She's making lots of bad decisions for her kids.
Let's just back up. Let's just let a second here. Is it actually worse to go from a teetotaling, church-going man who's a bit boring to a guy you meet on a train with one leg who passes bad checks?
You know what? Maybe it was more exciting for her.
I guess so.
And oddly enough, this guy was horrible to Richard Speck, but Richard, of course, emulated him later. So he was this abusive guy who was hard drinking, which, of course, both of those things... He kind of picked up those traits later. He was really horrible to Richard. He hated him. He called him a gutter rat. Richard started stealing the alcohol out of the house. And he really struggled in school. Part of the reason why he struggled was he was very vain and he didn't wear his glasses, which he needed. And if you've seen any pictures of him, he was not a good looking guy. So
did Carly Simon write that song about him?
Probably.
She's never disclosed.
Probably. I mean, I think that's probably why she didn't disclose it, because...
Did she make songs about trains, too? There's a reference there.
Probably.
Solar clips,
hidden messages.
So anyways, Richard Speck wanted to get close to his stepdad because he loved trains. Go on.
So, he was just going downhill fast. Bad crowd. He had like this real like kind of creepy greaser look. His hair is all slicked back. And
bad crowd in the 50s.
By this point, this was like the late 50s, yeah. So he was like going out with these kind of older girls, and yet at the same time had like a real sense of contempt for girls that he thought were easy. So he was like having sex with older girls, but then like talking shit about them. This sounds like sounds like half the guys in high school.
You go the war widows who worked in the factories in their 40s, husbands had died in Germany.
Probably not.
Anyway,
but when you look at him, you're like, oh god. He was awful, but he was really vain. He was always like meticulously dressed, and his clothes were always neat and clean. His hair was always slicked back. He was always like clean shaven and everything. So, also at this point in time in his life, I imagine he had horrible acne. I didn't actually read that, but he has horrible acne scars later in life. So at this point when he dropped out and he's drinking everything, the acne had to be somewhere in there when he was a teenager.
Poor
right?
too, Laura. I guess you wouldn't have liked him in high school.
I would not. I would have thought he was...
You're a poor pizza face.
I would have thought he was... Ew. Yeah.
Spoiler. He does.
Anyway. Yeah. So, by the time he was 20, he had already had quite a long rap sheet. All petty crimes. Indecent exposure, shoplifting, and then he got into burglary. And then around that time, he got his infamous tattoo, which said, do you know?
I love trains.
On his forearm.
I choose you.
This is the cheesiest fucking tattoo ever. Born to raise hell.
That's pretty badass.
Well, yeah, but you know what it says to me? I'm insecure. Because who has to tattoo "Born to Raise Hell" on their forearm?
Well, okay, first of all, this is before the hipster. This is in the 50s, I mean, right?
Right, when getting a tattoo was actually, kind of unusual unless you were a sailor.
That's quite the job stopper, too, on your forearm.
Well, luckily for him, it was unusual unless you were a sailor, and that's exactly what he became later.
Oh, there you go.
So he just was like,
here's my resume, sir.
I've got the tattoos.
By the way, I was raised by a man with a peg leg. I'd like a promotion immediately.
Oh, God. So he was already on his way to becoming quite the hoodie criminal. He apparently was good at conning people. He was kind of smooth and kind of charming. His mom bailed him out multiple times out of jail. And somewhere around in this time, he met a 15-year-old at a state fair and knocked her up 3 weeks later. So they did what any self-respecting couple would do at that point in time, is they got married. Oh. And he was absolutely horrible to her. He was abusive. He would pick up hookers and then drive up to their house and like park right outside so his wife could see out the window, see him in the car with prostitutes, and then he would like laugh and drive away real fast.
In his defense, it is kind of funny.
I mean, he wouldn't pay her doctor bills. He was actually in jail when their daughter was born for disturbing the peace. Yeah, I mean, he was like, it was like as if someone would have written a character of like a late 1950s hood.
Well, it sounds like the Flintstones was loosely based on this, wasn't it? I mean,
it was. He was actually Barney was based on Richard Speck.
It was a Yabba Dabba Doo joke.
It's another. Did I screw up your joke?
No.
What was it?
No, I don't joke.
Yabba Dabba Doo.
I don't know.
Did I miss a reference?
Well, it's no Simpsons, right?
Huh?
No, I'm sorry. I'm
real tired, and
no, I just had this picture of the 50s of this certain. I don't know. I feel like all the non-happy housewives.
You know, I keep picturing like remember like the bad kids in Grease. Yeah. What were they called? The Scorpions.
Hey, but they're never that bad though.
No, but like I picture like that he was like fancying himself a scorpion, except he was a real piece of shit criminal, even at this point. Oh, and also he would demand sex from his wife. Multiple times a day, 4 or 5 times a day, and they would beat her if she would say no.
4 or 5 times a day?
Yeah, I know. Who has that kind of sex drive? I mean, he was 20.
Didn't have cable back
He was
then,
20.
So.
And he was drinking a lot, doing a lot of drugs.
I feel like the drinking and drugs would be enough, though.
So a couple years go by. He was convicted of robbing a grocery store. He served 16 months for that. As soon as he was paroled, he attacked a woman with a knife. Tried to rape her, I think. Got a 16-month sentence, only served 6 months. And at that point, his wife wised up and divorced him.
So you got more time for robbing the grocery store than for raping the woman.
I guess. He didn't actually rape her. She got away somehow, but he tried to assault her at knife point. So, yeah. So his wife leaves him, and then he robs another grocery store, having not learned his fucking lesson. At that point, they issue a warrant for his arrest, and he flees to Chicago.
The land of Lincoln again.
Oh, actually, it wasn't Chicago yet. He fled for Monmouth, Illinois, which was where he was originally from. And
you're going to say Monmouth Cave. But no.
And I think some of his siblings lived there, and so he kind of crashed with them. So they were trying to get him odd jobs and things and trying to get him on his feet. It's like he was sort of like, it seems like he was kind of the black sheep of his family, but he was kind of doted on by his older siblings. They kind of constantly kind of tried to help him out to no avail. Eventually they got sick of it. But so he apparently carried this big hunting knife around, and he didn't really fit in the small town. He was always bragging that he had like threatened this woman with a knife back in Texas.
Robbed a grocery store.
Yeah, so people kind of noticed him. He didn't really fit in, as you might imagine. And then he had gotten there, I think, in March, and in May I don't think this was ever proven, but a woman that it was him, but a woman in town came home from her babysitting job. She was I think she was like in her 60s, came home from a babysitting job, finds a burglar in her house who then rapes her at knife point, and he had a southern drawl. So, it was probably him. I mean, he never got caught for that. And then a week after that, another woman disappeared from her job at a bar that he was at a lot. And her body was later found in an empty hog house behind the bar. And I think she'd been raped, and she had died from being punched in the stomach. So I think he was kind of like a sucker punchy kind of guy. He got in a lot of fights. He was getting arrested a lot for disturbing. So those were two kind of his early, probably him, never arrested for those.
So now we're in the late 50s, early 60s. And
right, now we're in the 60s. This is actually 1966 by this point.
Okay, let me just back up though. All this stuff just this is really creepy overtone. I'm just trying to picture this guy with the forearm tattoo way too early. I just look at the 50s and 60s, not as this really earnest time where people...
Yeah, except this was in the mid-60s, so I actually was, when I kept saying late 50s, it was probably early 60s. Because this is 1966 by the time he came back to Illinois.
He was 25.
So it was starting to be like the civil rights era. Things were starting to get a little, there was a sense of unrest.
But here's the thing. 25 is an interesting age, though, too, because developmentally speaking, most men are past the point where they have sporadic violent crime at 25. Most people that, everything is described could be, I don't want to say youthful discretions, but the behavior of a younger man is different than that of an older man. And when you get into this more extreme behavior at an older age, you have a much more deep-rooted psychological scarring and damage.
This guy had deep-rooted psychological scars for sure.
Yeah, because
he didn't. I mean, he was abused by his stepfather. I think his stepfather was probably emotionally abusive, but I mean, it didn't seem like nobody else in his family turned out like this. He was like I think he was like a bad seed. I tend to not think like I know I'm sure in some cases like in the whole nature versus nurture that the nurture aspect doesn't help, but I think there's enough people who grow up in super shitty abusive households who do not end up being murderers. That cannot be the sole reason someone goes on to do something like, you know, like all these horrible people we talk about. Anyway, so he skipped town after that woman was found in the fucking hog house dead from a blow to the abdomen. And he goes to Chicago because that's where his sister and his brother-in-law lived, and so he goes to stay with them. I mean, he was just like really, like he never got his shit together. He just went from like crashing on one person's couch to another and kind of getting money from this sibling, that sibling. So his
not a lovable little loser though. I mean,
no.
Like, I feel like now the little brother that's doing this is like maybe like he's using your credit card to buy porn or something like that.
Right.
This guy's killing people.
They had to bail him out a million times. Right. Now, I don't think his sister knew that he was like on the lam for these various murders in Texas and in Illinois at that point. But anyway, so so his sister's husband, his brother-in-law, gets him a job as a merchant marine, which is not a bad gig. So he goes on the ship. Of course, I think he was not well liked, and he like at one point like threatened somebody with a knife on the ship because he couldn't fucking stop threatening people with knives. He got in fights. He had an emergency appendectomy at one point, and he had to stay in this hospital in Michigan. And this is really weird, a weird little detail. While he was there, he befriended this nurse. Okay, and when he got out of the hospital, he stayed with her for 2 weeks. They had a lovely time. He bought her like little gifts. They had like nice romantic dinners together and everything, and then at the end of the 2 weeks they parted on good terms and he went back to Chicago. Is that bizarre?
It's not, and I'll tell you why.
It's bizarre when you look back, you know.
Without knowing all the context here, let's jump into a little topic of mine nurses. What other profession would that happen in though? He's in the hospital. He's clearly some kind of drifter.
I mean, he has born to raise hell on his forearm.
Tattooed born to raise hell. And this nurse who's educated, works in a hospital, clearly has a good job, has opportunities and options all around her base, decides to take home this patient for 2 weeks.
It was a real poor choice.
Nurses make bad choices.
Some nurses, I think that it's because it's like a caring profession that there's this urge to like nurture people who kind of are kind of losers, and so you know she kind of
predators though in every shape or form.
I think a lot of those caring professions, women in those caring professions, just it's like you want to fix people up.
You know, I don't think social workers do. Social workers don't.
No, because social workers don't fuck around. Like, right. Oh my God, no, you can't.
Yeah, they don't want to put.
That's
a
hard job.
They don't deal with fluids. That's the difference between social workers and nurses.
I don't know what it is. I just have known, just anecdotally, a handful of nurses.
I know a lot of nurses.
Were married to pieces of shit.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
but they date very nice people.
So that was this weird little blip in his life. Oh, and she gave him $80 too before he left.
$80 fucking dollars.
Yeah, which in 1966 was. I mean, even now, like getting $80 to some jackass that was like crashing with you for 2 weeks.
In 1987, $80 would buy you a Nintendo Entertainment System, which is really everything you could possibly want.
Extrapolate whatever the fuck that would have been in 1966 before video games were a thing.
A pair of jacks, some marbles. I don't know.
I don't know. In Richard's case, it probably bought him a whole lot of booze. So he goes back to Chicago. Okay, so by this point, it's July. All right. So this entire thing, I mean, he left Texas in March. So by July, he's back in Chicago. He's staying with his sister again. He tries to get on his ship, but he loses his spot. I think there was like somebody with more seniority boots him off this ship. So
bigger tattoos on his forehead.
Probably. July 11th, his sister's husband actually is like, you got to get out. So they kick him out of the house. He goes down into the city. He's staying in some shitty little motel by the Union shipping place.
Navy Pier?
No. What is it called? No. Anyways, it's down where the guys ship out from. So maybe, I don't know.
Boys Town?
I can't remember I didn't write it down. Shit. Anyway, so yeah, on the 12th of July, he loses yet another assignment. They called him down for this assignment, and it turned out they'd like intentionally double booked it because they were afraid. They called him in as a backup because they were afraid the other guy wasn't going to show. The other guy showed, so Richard didn't end up getting the spot. He was super pissed because by this point he's out of money. So he goes back to this motel, and he is just like a fucking fish drinking at this point. He's just drinking, all these cheap bars. He's playing pool. The day of July 13th, he calls his sister. She picks him up. They're sitting in her car, kind of down the street from the hotel the motel that he was staying in, near this park called Luella Park. So as they're sitting in the car, across the street from Luella Park, there's this row of kind of townhouses, like townhouse apartments. So they're all connected, you know. And one of them, or a couple of them actually, were boarding houses for these student nurses that were student nurses at, I think, Chicago Memorial Hospital. So as he's sitting there in the car with his sister talking about basically what a loser he is and how, you know, he doesn't have a job and whatever, he's watching these young nurses come in and out of the townhouse.
So $80.
Well, I think he was. So his sister gives him $25, something like that. Everyone's giving him fucking money. Yeah. So then he does what anyone would do in that situation. He goes to the bar and he keeps drinking.
Wait, you're like, you're like what anyone would do.
I'm just saying, like, okay, he's got no job. He's got no money. I mean, he's a raging alcoholic, I'm sure. He keeps spending the money that people are giving him to, like, live on until he finds another job. He keeps blowing it all on alcohol and drugs. So he goes to this bar and he's drinking with this woman, this older woman. She's in her 40s and named Ella Mae Hooper. And at some point he's got this knife on him all the time. He's got like a switchblade and a hunting knife on him all the time.
Hey, want to see my knife?
I feel like he's really kind of trying too hard at this point. You know, I mean, he's like flashing this knife around. So he forces this woman at knife point out of the bar, down the street to his room at the Shipyard Inn, up to his room, and then rapes her at knife point, and then steals her .22.
The pistol. Yeah,
pistol. Steals it out of her purse, and like $4 or whatever she had in her purse.
This is a classy lady. I mean,
she had a pistol in her purse. She was badass. Her name is Ella Mae Hooper. She's day drinking at a bar, and she's got a pistol in her purse.
Yeah, and they're no good. So
no. I mean,
how do we know that she was?
I don't know. I don't know how the fuck that happened, because it sounded like they were in the bar together, and he somehow got her at knife point from the bar back to the Shipyard Inn. I don't know. That sounds a little shady. Sounds to me like,
did she add that after the fact?
I think so. It sounds to me like perhaps. Now I'm not trying to victim blame, but it sounds real unlikely. It sounds more likely that she went willingly with him back to his room, and at some point he raped her, or they had sex, and he stole her gun. He did steal her gun, though.
Ella Mae's confession to her best friend. He had all these cool knives. I love knives. So I said, let's go back to my place. You can drink a little bit cheaper there. I don't want to pay big bucks. I
don't think he beat her up or anything. So I'm not even sure how that happened later. It must have been when I don't know if they tracked the gun down. I'm not sure how Ella Mae Hooper even.
Based on what little I know of him, I feel like if he had her by himself and he was, I think, wouldn't he just be mad if she didn't have? I mean, this guy's getting consensual sex.
I think he was trying to rob her. I think he was just trying to rob her, steal money out of her purse. She happened to have a gun. He just took it. I mean, he was just like stealing. He stole all the time. He was he shoplifted from an early age. He was a burglar. You know, he was just always taking shit from people.
A real Renaissance man.
Yeah. So, not to say that people that are thieves necessarily go on to murder, but I feel like
we don't disparage thieves.
But I feel like but I feel like people who are like pathologically stealing all the time, and people, especially people who are willing to break into places and steal stuff, like that's a pretty weird.
I think I've stolen sushi.
Pretty
a few times
weird
as an
thing
adult.
to do.
Does that make me a serial killer?
No, I hope not.
No.
As I always ask you, you're not a serial killer,
No,
are
I
you?
think on 2 occasions though, I've been in those self-checkout lanes and I've picked up sushi and it doesn't ring up, so I'm like, fuck it. And I just put it in the cart. And I figure I'll walk out. If someone says you didn't pay for that sushi, I'll be like, I thought I ran it, but no one ever runs up. And I'm thinking to myself, I should steal sushi big time.
God,
I talked to a buddy this weekend, and I mentioned the stealing sushi thing to him, and he's like, I steal sushi too. Like,
wow.
So I know
it seems like
2 people. I mean, I don't need to steal the sushi.
I feel like
Only
if you're
done
going to steal
twice.
something, it shouldn't be sushi.
Well, I mean, I got the sushi. It wasn't that good. I wanted to pay for it. It didn't scan. I'm sitting there looking around like, oh, come on.
What do you mean it didn't scan? You were at the self-checkout
Yeah.
and the sushi didn't scan?
Wouldn't
That's an age-old story. Sushi didn't scan, you walk out with it. That's free sushi, my friend.
I said, not checking my white privilege. Going to walk out and act like it was an accident.
Hey, and I bet nobody noticed.
No, and I think I could have taken the sushi and thrown it at
Yeah,
half the employees
probably.
there whose faces were probably
Were you at
so
Myers?
numb from, yeah.
Yeah, Meyer.
I mean, they're so
They're
numbed
like,
out.
get that fucking sushi out of here.
Like, look, it's all I can do.
I don't even want to deal with a shoplifter right now. You just walk out of the store, mister.
I mean, I gotta hope that they're all on some kind of drug.
Jeez.
Not like a fun drug, like a recreational. Like they got some hardcore pills, like methadone spliced with morphine, and they're just sitting there, and they can't feel any nerve in their face because the only thing worse than working at Meijer is having to think about people who work at Meijer because it is such an empty, desolate existence there. They make you wear those red shirts and khaki pants. And you just stand there and look at idiots spending more than you make in a week on junk that they don't need.
Well, and I just imagine, like, when I'm shopping at Myers, there's inevitably somebody in front of me who's buying, like, 16 bags of cat litter or, like, 40 cases of Mountain Dew or some, like, just ridiculous, just bizarre cartload of stuff. And if you're going to be ringing that up all day and then dealing with people like, there's always somebody pulling out coupons and then some of the coupons are expired and I always pick the wrong lane. And there's always some issue with that. And then somebody's got an issue with their bridge card. And then, I mean, there's just all kinds of shit happening. And those, yeah, they got dead eyes. The people working at Myers,
You know what
I feel
should
bad
do?
for them.
I got an idea, real quick. You know how you go to Home Depot or Lowe's and they sell hot dogs?
Yeah.
Outside, because like somehow the ideal.
Right. That is
product
the
for
weirdest
person
thing, but it works.
Here's what you do. We
Yeah.
get a van. Get a big van. We park outside of Meijer. And we perform abortions in that van. People walking out of Meijer. Because I bet.
my
Oh come on! I bet you.
Stop.
I think you're in the frame of mind. If you're walking out of Meijer, it's like, ooh, I can
Well,
get an
I
abortion.
mean, especially because when you're in there's always some kid who's just like fucking screaming,
Yeah.
and the mom's like, "Shut up!"
Put it right next to the horse that costs a penny.
God.
The abortion van.
Sandy?
And the penny horse.
Sandy the horse.
Sandy the penny horse.
Oh my God.
And Vinny the abortion van.
And you know what's crazy? When I'm in there, it's like, remember in Ghostbusters 2, the slime, and it made them all angry?
I hate that movie. But yeah, I remember.
Okay, but you know what I'm talking about? Like, it made them like all violent, and that's how I feel at Myers. Like, that's why I hate taking the kids to Myers, because the Myers mom thing just starts to come over me, and I'm like, stop touching that! Don't touch that bag of rice. Put that back in the. I mean, it does. It makes you all tense. There's something in that store, and the really weird thing is, Myers really is not that different from like Target.
25 years ago, it was Target.
Yeah,
Target,
but
Target will
the
become Meijer.
atmosphere is completely different.
Well, Walmart's becoming Kmart. Kmart's dead. I mean, all these stores, they just eventually evolve into something else. I mean,
true.
Meijer, I mean, I guess it's a Michigan store. It's throughout the Midwest. I don't know if it's...
It's like
on the
Walmart.
coast.
It's pretty much Walmart.
Yeah, it's
pretty
between
much
Walmart and
Walmart.
Target, I'd say.
Oh, it's Walmart. I mean, it's okay. Maybe it's a touch classier than Walmart, perhaps.
Well, they have less meat than Walmart and I mean, Walmart just...
We're basing it on our Walmart, which is like the worst Walmart in the world. Like some towns have nice, clean Walmarts.
Saline, Michigan.
Our
got a nice
Walmart is the worst.
I've been to many
It's
Walmart.
terrible. But
There's,
anyway,
like beef jerky at every corner. But go on.
Go
Sorry.
on.
Sorry.
back to rape and murder.
Away from the abortion van.
Oh, that is just tasteless.
But I think if it would make a buck. Seriously.
Well, especially because abortions are going to be totally illegal soon, and then illegal
Ooh,
abortions.
we just got political.
There's a market.
Who would respect vote for, Laura?
Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, so okay, where was I? So this is July 13th in the daytime. So he's already stolen a gun. He's having quite a day. So nobody really knows what went through Richard Speck's mind the day of the 13th, but somehow he got a thought in his head.
Was it a Friday the 13th by any
I don't
chance?
know what day of the week it was. You'd have to, I'm sure we could find out.
What year was this?
1966.
Okay. 6/6.
Uh-huh.
What month?
Ooh, 1966. It was July. I'm sorry. It wasn't June.
God
damn it, Richard. You fucked up again.
Dicky Speck.
It could have been June 6th, 1966. But you fucked up.
Born to Raise Hell, a month too late.
Man.
Go
he
on.
was always fucking things up. So, that night, he makes a little plan. He's quite the little Boy Scout, and he's all prepared for it. So,
Okay.
Right now I'm going to jump to the scene over at on East 100th Street in a townhouse at 2313 East 100th Street. There were a couple townhouses. There was a row of townhouses, and two of them next to each other both housed these student nurses. And in the townhouse that's next to 2313, there was like the house mother. Mm-hmm. So she lived in that one, but the girls who lived in 2319 had to call in when they'd come home. Like they had a curfew. It was the 60s. The women all had curfews. They had to call the house mother. I think their curfew was midnight when they got home. But it was I think 8 women living in this house. So in 2319 East 100th Street, they weren't all nursing students. There were 3 Filipino nurses that were on an exchange program from the Philippines, and their names were Corazon Amaral, Valentina Pasion, and Merlita Gargulo.
Those are beautiful names.
Beautiful names, and they were really beautiful too. So they were at the taking part in this exchange program. So they lived in this house, and they kind of they missed home, and they were kind of close with each other, and they felt a little bit they weren't really super friends with the American nursing students because there was just like this kind of cultural rift. I mean, they got along fine, but they didn't really hang out. Okay. So they kind of kept to themselves. They wrote letters home. They cooked Filipino food. The two, Corazon and Merlita, were best friends, and they shared a room together. And then Valentina slept in a room with some of the other the American nurses. So the American student nurses were Gloria Davy, Suzanne Ferris, Patricia Matusik, Nina Jo Schmall, Pamela Wilkening, and they also had a friend who was also a nursing student, Mary Ann Jordan, who did not live there but stayed over a lot. She was like best friends with a couple of them and would stay over. So that night, the 3 Filipino nurses were home, and Pamela and Patricia and Nina were all also home. So Suzanne and Marianne were out together, and Gloria was out on a date. So at about 11 p.m., the 6 girls that were home, they are all in bed. Mm-hmm. The 3 of the women, Valentina, Pamela, and Patricia, were all asleep in the biggest bedroom that was in the back of the townhouse. This is a 2-story townhouse. You walk in the back door, there's a kitchen. You go up a flight of stairs. There was a one big kind of master bedroom in the back. Then there was an east bedroom and a west bedroom that were smaller. So there were 2 girls in each of those smaller bedrooms. No, wait, 3, maybe 3. And then the rest of them were all in this big bedroom in the back. So Corazon and Merlita are asleep in one room. Valentina, Pamela, and Pat asleep in the other. Nina are in the big bedroom. Nina's in the other bedroom. About 11 o'clock, Richard Speck comes up in the back door of the townhouse, jimmies open the back window, pops the screen out, reaches in, unlocks the door, and comes in the townhouse. So I was looking online at pictures of these townhouses because when I was reading all this, I kind of kept picturing these sort of big I don't know why, but I was like picturing them being really big and kind of like
Chicago
vacuous
townhouse,
and
yeah.
kind of like brick and everything. No, they were like kind of newer buildings. They're real small. I mean, they're apartments, basically 2-story apartments, really small, and they're right next to each other. I mean, there's a thin wall separating this townhouse from the next one.
Okay.
And they're little. I mean, little rooms, little townhouses. This is not a big space that this all happened in. So he goes upstairs, and Corazon hears this knock at the door. And she said later that it sounded like just a calm, like 1, 2, 3, 4 knocks at the door. So, of course, there's the other nurses.
Bedroom door?
Yeah, the bedroom door. So, there's other nurses that live in the house. So she said, she just goes over and opens it. So she opens the door, and there's Richard Speck. He's got a gun in one hand and a knife in the other.
I think I love knives. They weren't
He
practical.
did love knives. He actually did. He did. That as you'll find out, he really loved knives, not so much guns. I mean, the gun was just an afterthought, really. So he forces his way in. He asked her where the rest of the girls are. He wakes up Merlita, who is also in the bedroom.
There's 3 Filipino women in this bedroom, right?
No, 2 in this bedroom. So he forces them down the hall into the back bedroom, I think. And while he's waking up the American nurses in the back bedroom, the 3 Filipino women, the third one's now awake, get away, and they go hide in a closet. So they're holding the door in this closet shut. They're in the bedroom, in the same room with the other women, but they're in this closet. They're hiding in this closet. And while they're in there, one of the American nurses comes over and knocks on the closet door and says, you got to come out. He's not going to hurt us. He just wants money. You guys have to come out. It's going to be okay. So there's your first fucking nightmare right there. Like they were hiding, and this, I don't know which nurse it was, and one of the American nurses convinces them to come out of the closet because they're believing Richard Speck at this point, who's using his sort of smooth, slow Southern drawl, and he's all kind of clean. Despite being a fucking drifter, he's all kind of clean cut looking. He's like always kind of freshly shaved, and like his hair is all slicked back and everything. So he's talking very calmly to them and saying to them, "I'm not going to kill you. Don't worry. It's going to be okay. I just need money."
I feel like Mike Spence would use this whole story as a metaphor for homosexuality. A demon wants you to come out of the closet, but you gotta stay in the closet where it's safe. Don't come out of the closet. Fight that urge. Anyways, go on.
Anyway, did you say Mike Spence?
I did. That's nobody, is it?
Who the fuck is Mike Spence?
Who's the vice president?
Pence?
What's his first name?
Now I can't remember.
Did I say Mike Spence?
Yeah, you did.
Well, that's getting edited out. I'm a moron. No, I probably won't.
Anyway.
I'll probably just leave it in there. Mike Spence.
Mike Spence is just some guy's fucking homophobic, I guess.
Phil Spector?
Yeah. He's telling people to stay in the closet. What an asshole.
Michael Pence.
Okay. Anyway. Yeah. So where was I? So Richard Speck gets all the nurses that are home at that point, lines them up sitting under the window facing him in the bedroom. So he's standing there leaning against one of the bunk beds in the room. He's talking to them. He's kind of talking in this kind of calm voice. He's almost like being kind of flirtatious and jokey with them. And at one point, even like one of the nurses kind of like, giggling a little bit. Like he's really trying to put them at ease. I
like your knife too.
Oh God. He tells them that he needs money for, to go to New Orleans. That's his line. So he's like, I just need money. I'm not going to hurt you. So at this point, let's just back up for a second. So at this point, you've got 6 women. They're all in their 20s. They're all sitting. They're not restrained in any kind of way. They're sitting there. Here's one guy. He's standing there. He's got a gun, which is scary, and a knife. But it's a .22, which I don't know anything about guns, but that's not a super powerful gun, right? It's
accurate, but yeah, it's not.
Yeah, but there are 6 of them. Mm-hmm. So they, in their minds, I think they were thinking, look, we're just going to cooperate with this guy. We're not going to piss him off. We're going to be calm. We're going to calm him down. We're going to give him what he wants, and he's going to leave.
It's a real shame. I feel like nurses have some understanding of the human body. And
I think they'd actually had training in dealing with like psych patients, right? And the training in that is sort of just like keep them calm, calm them, you know what I mean? So that's kind of what they were drawing on. They were like, well, this guy's the bad news, but we're just gonna not threaten him, whatever. So this is fucked up. While the women are sitting there and Richard Speck's talking to them, two of the other women come home. Mary Ann, who actually didn't live there but stayed there a lot, and Suzanne, they come into the house. Mm-hmm. They use the phone in there to call the house mother because they had to check in for the curfew, and they leave again with their other friend. They come into the house, they do all this, they leave. Nobody knows that they're there. Richard Speck doesn't know they're there. The other girls don't know they're there. So they're there. They're in there while this is all happening. They have no idea, and they leave. And they've called the house mother. So now the house mother thinks they're home and safe. Mm-hmm. Okay. So anyway, he gathers money up from all the girls. He actually has to like walk them down the hall to one of the bedrooms so they can get their purse. They did not have. It didn't seem like they had a lot of money between them, but this is still his story to them. So he gathers up all this money from them, takes them all back to the big back bedroom. At 11:40, Gloria Davy, who had been on a date with her fiance, comes back to the house. She goes to the phone, calls the house mother, checks in, and then goes upstairs. She starts to open the door, and Richard Speck pulls the door open, and he points a gun at her, and she screams in a low, guttural scream. Mm-hmm. So she's the only one who's made a noise at that point. She's now the seventh girl in the room. So he gets her over by the window. He's still telling them not to be scared. He's like smoking cigarettes, kind of joking a little bit with them, you know. I mean, you can just kind of imagine he's got this southern accent. He's still like, "No, I'm not going to hurt you. I just need money, blah, blah, blah." I mean, at this point, they're still trying to, they still think this is going to be okay. So then, while he's doing this, he suddenly takes the bed sheet off of one of the bunk beds and starts cutting into strips with his switchblade. Now, while he's doing this, he has to set his gun down. So he sets the gun down on the bunk bed, and he's cutting the sheet into strips. Meanwhile, there's 7 women sitting there, and they're still trying to stay calm and not piss him off.
Immediately at this point, if I'm a woman, which I'm not, there's 7 of us there, we'll decide who the most attractive one is. We'll give a look. I'll move my head like that and have that woman stand about 15 feet away from him and start disrobing slowly and playing with her boobs and to distract him. Why wouldn't you?
Well, what they should have done was rushed him.
That's what I'm saying, but let him look at that, then get the gun or do something.
Yeah, so I mean, and
at some
really
point,
like
nudity in my scenario.
Oh God. And probably in Richard Speck's scenario, I shall find out.
Yeah, well, obviously,
anyway, disgusting. But yeah, but I think what's always haunted me about this whole case is that they really were kind of working off the idea that if they were calm and did what this guy said, that it would be okay. And the more crime stories I read, the more I think this: if someone is pointing a gun at me and they're about to try to corral me somewhere, move me to a second location, or tie me up, I'm going to risk being shot at that point. Yeah, because that's not going to work out well. And the other thing that they should have probably been thinking about in this case is he had no kind of disguise on. He's got a big visible tattoo on his forearm. He's pretty distinctive looking if you look at him. I mean, he's this pockmarked, long face, kind of like, lanternfish mouth. I mean, he's really not an attractive man, and he's real distinctive looking, and he's making no attempt to disguise how he looks. So, and that's another thing. I mean, like we talked about that in the Brown's Chicken thing, that people walk in with no mask and they're robbing you. Ugh. People do not like to leave witnesses. So, and really, like, I mean, after reading this, I'm like, I would never, like, if I found myself in this situation, I will risk being shot because this guy's not letting you go.
Especially when they're digging deeper. They're not trying to hasty
exit. At this point, he had gotten money from all of them. They're still
Yeah,
sitting
you left
there.
that part out. So he
No,
got...
he had. No, I didn't leave it out. I said he had gone around and collected money from all of them. He walked them down. He walked them down to one of the girls' rooms. He'd gotten all the money from them. He's still kind of standing around. I think at this point he was maybe acting like he was waiting for the other girls to come home. But I mean, as time went on, what
was he thinking? Do you think I want to rape one? I want to leave. I want to do this.
I think he had, as you'll hear the details later. I'm pretty sure he had this. He did exactly what he set out to do. I don't think this was a robbery that turned south. I mean, I think this was exactly his plan, and I think he pulled it off almost exactly what he had hoped to do.
Okay.
And don't forget, he'd seen these women earlier in the day. In fact, one of them, I think it was Pamela Wilkening, had been wearing a yellow dress, and he actually asked her at one point, were you the nurse in the yellow dress?
Interesting.
Yeah. So he had this in his head. So anyway, he starts cutting the bedsheet into strips, okay? He sets his gun down to do it. It's on the top bunk, so it's not like they could easily get to it, but it's not in his hand. So then he gets all these strips of bedsheet, crouches down on the floor, and starts tying them up. There's 7 of them. He ties up, I think he ties up Pamela first. Oh, and at one point during this, no, wait. I don't want to, never mind. He's tying them up. He ties up Pamela first. He ties her wrists together behind her back, and he ties her ankles together. So he starts going down the line of women, tying each one up like that. And they're sitting there letting him tie them up because they're still hoping that he's going to let them go at some point. Now, I don't know what the fuck they think he's tying them up for. And I think they do start to ask him at this point, but they're scared and they don't do anything. And at some point, while he's tying them up, there's 2 of them are not tied up yet. The doorbell rings because a nursing student from next door had come over to borrow some bread to make sandwiches or something because they were up late studying. Mm-hmm. She comes over and rings the doorbell. So Richard Speck takes the 2 remaining untied up nursing students. It was Corazon and Merlita, and he takes them downstairs to the door at gunpoint, and opens the door. And by then, the woman had left. There was nobody there.
Okay.
So takes them back upstairs. Oh, and then in case you thought that he couldn't be more despicable, then he says to Merlita at one point, he asked her, "Do you know karate?" Proving that he was not only violent and horrible, but also kind of racist, because he just thought she was Asian and didn't distinguish that the Philippines has nothing to do with karate.
Well, to be fair, I don't know if that's racist or
What
much as
an idiot.
Arrested Development.
What an idiot!
I think every 10-year-old boy.
Plus, what the fuck did that have to do with anything? He's tying these women
That's
up.
what I'm saying. It's just a boyish question
Yeah,
to ask. I mean, when you're a kid or a boy at least, and you see karate movies or kung fu, Bruce Lee.
Real case of Arrested Development.
Just saying.
So he gets every one of them tied up, 7 of them.
He didn't ask if she was good at math, though.
That's true. So
there's smell like rice.
Two of the nurses are still out though, Suzanne and Marianne, but the rest, the 7 of them are now all tied up. So he then picks up Pamela Wilkening, and I read and watched a bunch of different things on this, and some of the sources said this and some didn't. So I don't know if this is true or not, but in a couple places I read that at this point she said to him, "I could pick you out of a lineup."
Oh, smart.
Kinda. Except
No,
it
it's not
really,
smart.
really,
It's not.
really pissed him off.
Yeah.
I mean, it was kind of brave of her.
Was it?
Sort of, but it was it really didn't help her case. At this point, I think their death sentences were signed the minute they got tied up. I mean, didn't matter what she said to him at this point.
Still.
So he takes her down, he takes her out of the room. So they were all in this big bedroom together. He takes her out of the room, takes her down to the east bedroom. So they're in the room. They hear her say, "Ah," almost like a sigh. And then they hear nothing. So what they heard him stuffing ripped up sheet into her mouth and gagging her.
Okay.
So that's terrifying. But at this point, nobody has screamed except for the one woman who walked in the room who just kind of gave a low
At this point, based on couldn't they help untie each other at this point?
Don't forget he's a sailor.
Yeah.
He tied them all super fucking tight. I mean, I think that by the time they were tied up, they're fucked. And they were tied in a really bad position with their hands behind their back and their legs out in front of them and their ankles tied. So it's a really...
Their hands behind their back.
Yeah.
And ankles out in front of them.
Right.
Okay.
So, he unties her ankles. He gags her with the sheet. He spread eagles her on the floor. So interestingly, I couldn't figure out if he raped all these nurses or just some of them. It wasn't real specific. Like a lot of the articles said he raped all of them. But then in some of them, it sounded like he kind of didn't get to it. So in this woman's case, I'm not sure, because as he's getting ready to rape her, he was definitely intending to. Suzanne and Mary Ann come home.
Okay.
So while he's down in the room with Pamela and out of the room, the nurses that are left in the big bedroom start arguing. So the Filipino nurses are arguing for trying to do something, knock a lamp over, scream and yell, do something. And the American nurses are arguing back that they need to just stay calm, and that's how they need to handle this guy. That if they're just calm and nice and cooperative, that it'll be all okay. Now, what the fuck they think he's doing with Pamela at this point, I don't know. But I think they kind of knew he was probably going to rape her, because the Filipino nurses were also saying they wanted to protect their honor by fighting.
Okay.
So since they couldn't agree, they just kind of were all sitting there. Plus, they were all tied up, so they couldn't really do a lot.
Woman can't agree.
So anyway.
And we lose an election.
Shut the fuck up.
Donald Trump becomes president. It's a metaphor.
God damn it. Poor
okay, so that's pretty fucked up, though. I'm sorry. You think there was like 7 men in the room that they would be arguing over how to be nice to guys, tie them up when they hear their friend getting stabbed?
I feel like at this point in time, perhaps this is like kind of like the real women's lib had not started yet, and women were kind of probably taught to be polite a lot.
God bless the Filipino woman.
And well, seriously. They, and now, I mean, no, do not be polite. Do not be calm. You gotta fight your way out. No, but they just weren't, they just weren't wired to think that way, I think.
Cure the cancer that's abnormal behavior that's dangerous. This guy's throat should have been crushed early. I don't know. That's fucked up.
Yeah. Well, he should have been in prison at this point, because he'd committed so many crimes. Do you know how many times he was arrested in Texas? 42 times. He'd been arrested 42 times in Texas.
Now Texas is a real law and order state.
And this is like the other fucking shit fact of this whole thing, which hopefully wouldn't happen. Hopefully this is better now, and this would probably be helpful. Is that like the states didn't talk to you, so he flees Texas, and then he's like commits a crime in Illinois, and like nobody outside of Texas knows anything about what happened in Texas and vice versa. It's just like there's no connections in between. Even within Illinois, because he leaves Monmouth, Illinois, goes to Chicago.
Yeah.
Apparently that was far enough. It's in the same fucking state. Okay, so back to these poor women. He's got Pamela tied up on the floor, and Suzanne and Mary Ann return home. They walk upstairs and they walk into the bedrooms. They walk into the scene of their friend tied up on the floor with this guy on top of her. And they scream and they try to run, and he chases them. He gets in their way, blocks the staircase. So they did try to fight him. They're the only ones, I think, who tried to fight him. They yelled, and the one woman, when they found her later, she was holding the bed sheet. So he tried to tie him up, and he couldn't. They were fighting too much, so he stabbed them both to death. So he did not rape those two women. He stabbed them. He stabbed Suzanne 18 times, and then he strangled her. And then he stabbed Mary Ann in the eye, chest, and neck. Then he goes over to Pamela and stabs her in the heart. So boom, boom, boom. He's killed 3 women in the one bedroom. Yeah. And by the way, he never used his gun. He later said he liked using a knife because a gun is too loud. If he'd used a gun, somebody would have called the cops, because they're in these little apartments, which had to have those, paper thin walls like apartments do. There's no way he could have used a gun and gotten away with this. He was using a knife, and he was strangling them. So those 3 women are dead.
How many left in the bedroom?
There there were 9 total women.
Christ.
Wait, 7, 8, 9. Yeah. So there's 7. No, so 9 minus 3 is 6. So there were 6 left. I can do math. So here's a real chilling part. Mm-hmm. He's just stabbed 3 women to death, right?
Right.
So he goes in the bathroom and he washes all the blood off. So they hear the water running because the bathroom's kind of in between the bedrooms. Okay. So he takes their friend. I think they heard the other girls come home. They hear a little bit of noise, scuffling. Then they hear the water run. Then he comes back in. He's totally clean, right? The next girl he takes is Nina. Takes her to the other bedroom, the west bedroom. They hear her make that same sound, that ah sound. So at this point, they're all like, fuck, this is, too late. They realize that this is, so they've got really no recourse, but they all try to hide, which is heartbreaking. So they're tied up and they're all kind of like scooting around in the room trying to hide in between beds, behind, next to dressers and things. And Corazon Amorao scooches herself under a bunk bed. So she's got to like really shimmy under. These bunk beds were tiny too. Like, again, I was like picturing, I don't know what I was picturing, this giant townhouse and these like big old, bunk beds and stuff that she could easily shimmy under. Like when you look at it, they look like dorm rooms, like they're those little low beds. So she somehow got herself under this bunk bed.
They go back to back and use their hands and tie each other though. That's...
You would, I guess, but they're panicking at this point. They all hide except Gloria Davy, who had come home from the date.
Yeah.
I forgot to mention this part. So she, when he was tying her up, he tried to get her to turn around, and she was like, she had been drinking, so she couldn't really turn herself around. So he just picked her up and set her on the top of one of the bunk beds. So somehow during this whole thing, she falls asleep, quote unquote. So she passed out. She was drunk.
Okay.
So she passed out. So she's asleep. So she's the only one who doesn't try to hide. She's laying on the bunk bed. She's out. Which is kind of a blessing later when you think about it. Like, okay, at least she wasn't like in terror this whole time. Like she was just unconscious. So Corazon squeezes under a bed. And then at some point, again, one of the nursing students next door thinks she hears a weird noise through the hall. So she comes over and she's listening outside the window to see if she can hear anything. Like she's down on the ground, like up, like looking up there, like she thinks she heard a weird noise that sound like an animal. But she listens up there, she can't hear anything. The only thing she can hear is the air conditioning unit in the one bedroom that actually was the bedroom that Nina had been taken to and was in at that point. But it had one of those loud air conditioning window units. That was all she could hear. Also, sometime during this whole time, the nurses next door ordered a pizza.
Okay.
The guy comes to deliver a pizza, goes to the wrong house, goes to the 2319 house at first, and is standing at the door. But then before he can ring the doorbell or anything, realizes he's at the wrong address and goes to the right address. So delivers pizza. So there's just like so many near misses. It's just fucking frustrating.
Are their ankles tied up because they stand up and hop or anything, or not?
I'm not sure. I think maybe, but it's hard to... I'm trying to picture, but it's kind of hard to stand up if your arms are tied behind you, and I think like everything's tied real tight.
Yeah.
I don't think their ankles were... I think they were tied in front of them. I'm not sure. So, anyway. They're in there. They hear the water run again. And he comes back. So his MO at this point, rape, stab, and strangle. That's what he did to pretty much everybody. So he came back. No Nina. He comes back by himself again after the water to run. This is so fucking scary. So he takes Valentina next. He takes her to the west bedroom. That's the one that he'd just taken the other girl to, and they hear her scream. So 20 minutes later, they hear the water running. So she screamed. Like are
they seeing the victims that he's killed? Are they in the hallway? Are they in the bedrooms?
Well, that one did. That woman did.
Yeah. So
because he took her to the same one. So they think that probably was her being gagged, just screaming. But I mean, could try to imagine being gagged. You make like an ah sound as they're jamming. But she managed to kind of scream as he did. So, I mean, oh my God. So at this point they realized, I think that, which is just like, that's always the worst part about these things is when people have to sit there and know that something horrible is going to happen to them. So then 20 minutes after that, they hear the water running. So with that woman, he had slashed her throat so deeply that her voice box was exposed. So, I mean, he's got a lot of rage at this point. I mean, he is really... You can't stab someone to death without having a fuckload of rage. And he didn't even know these women.
It's like murder porn, though.
And he did it over and over. I mean, to have enough rage built up that you can stab all these people, one after another, so methodically and so violently... When they found the bodies later, they could only... The house mother, who knew all these women really well, could only identify 3 of them. The rest of them were so badly bloodied that she couldn't identify them.
Jesus fucking Christ.
Yeah. So, Merlita was next, and Cora heard her yell in Tagalog. Is that Filipino language?
Yes.
Is that how you say that, Tagalog? Heard her yell in Tagalog, "It hurts." And then 30 minutes after that, the water running. So he'd stabbed her too. Stabbed her and strangled her. So he gets Patricia next. Meanwhile, Cora's under the bed, okay? So Cora's own has hidden herself under the bed. He takes Patricia. He doesn't take her out of the room. By that point, he's like out of spaces. So he's just like, fuck it. So he doesn't take her out of the room. He tells her to move. There's like, I think from the description, I was trying to picture the layout, but like I think there was like a bathroom that was like connected between the 2 bedrooms. So it sounded like he kind of tried to move her into the bathroom, and she didn't move fast enough. He kicked her in the stomach real hard, and later I think there was like they could tell like in the autopsy that there was like this severe hemorrhaging from how hard he kicked her. I mean, he just was. This is just like horrible. I mean, he was a complete sadistic torture. Ugh. He takes her into the bathroom, I think, between the rooms, and he's gone for 30 minutes. Again, stabbed her and strangled her, probably raped her. So then he goes back to the big room. At this point, the only people left in this room are Corazon, who's under the bed, and Gloria Davy, who's on top of the bunk bed, passed out. So he kind of wakes up Gloria. She says... This is scary, but she says, "I dreamed my mother died." I mean, she's like she's drunk. She's kind of passed out. So as she's waking, that's what she said. So he doesn't even bother to move her. He just rapes her right on the bunk bed.
So I assume he thinks she's the last one there.
And Corazon can hear him ask her, "Have you done this before?" And then ask her to please put her legs behind his back, which is like so fucking disgusting that he's like giving her like directions. Oh God. So then after he does this, he takes her downstairs to the living room, puts her on the couch, rapes her, sodomizes her, strangles her to death. So she's on the living room couch, like right when, like inside the front door.
No stabbing though?
I don't think he did, actually. I think he just strangled her to death. Horribly. But while he's gone, Corazon, she kind of panics because she's afraid he knows that she's under that bed. Mm-hmm. So she scoots herself from under that bed all the way across the room and under the other bed on the opposite wall. So now she's under a different bunk bed. She's actually, I think, under the bunk bed that Gloria Davy had been in, and like the blanket's kind of hanging down, so it's kind of covering her.
Okay.
So he's gone for 50 minutes this time because this was the last woman. So we had like all the time in the world with her. So God only knows. I mean, yeah. So he's gone for almost an hour with it. So the whole thing was over 4 hours of this.
Right.
From the time that he got there until the time that pretty much everybody was dead. But that 15 minutes was barely enough time for Corazon to get across the room and under that other bunk bed because she had to scoot, all tied up and everything. But she gets under it. He comes back in. He after all this, comes back in, gets Gloria's purse from the bed, takes the money out of it, and walks out of the bedroom. Leaves the house. Now here's a really fucking chilling detail. He walks out of the house. He's totally clean. He's just stabbed 8 women to death, and he doesn't have any blood on him. Because, number one, he'd washed the blood off in between every single one of them. And number two, and this is like the creepiest fucking fact, and this shows that he completely, this was premeditated. He totally knew what he was going in to do. This is not a robbery gone wrong. He brought a bag with him, and in the bag was extra white t-shirts. He changed shirts multiple times throughout this 4 hours, and when the police came later, they found multiple white t-shirts scattered throughout the townhouse with blood and sweat on them. So he brought extra clothes so that when he walked out of there, he was completely clean. Isn't that creepy? So anyway, he leaves, he throws a knife in the river, and he goes back to his motel room. Cora lies under the bed for hours and hours until she hears the alarm clock going off. At 6 a.m., she climbs out from under the bed, gets herself untied somehow at this point.
Wait, she gets herself untied?
I mean, I don't know. She somehow gets herself loose at this point. She's been laying there for hours trying to untie herself. I think she's, by that point, she's untied her ankles or something. She runs through the house to the east bedroom, pushes open the window, climbs out on the window ledge, and just starts screaming. So it's 6 a.m. and this is this quiet neighborhood. There's like a park across the street. So it takes like 5 minutes for anybody to come. She's just standing out there screaming and screaming. And finally the neighbors start coming out. And the nurse next door, one of the nurses next door comes out, and she's on the ledge and she's screaming, "Oh my God, they're all dead. All my friends are dead." Because, of course, at this point, I think she'd run through the house and she probably had seen some of her friends. Because she's out in which bedroom was she? Let's see, the east bedroom. So there's at least a couple people in there dead. Well. So the woman, the nurse next door, gets the house mother. They run inside. The first person, of course, that they see is Gloria Davy on the couch. They get Corazon out of there. They call the police.
Holy shit.
Yeah. So
what a fucking piece of shit this guy is.
Yeah, he really, really was. He was really horrible. It's actually kind of like, it was actually like, usually I can read this stuff and kind of compartmentalize it, but my God, like I've been kind of researching him for a few weeks now, and it got kind of depressing. I mean, he is just a bad, bad man.
Well, it's just aggravating too, because right now I want to see vengeance personified in the past. I want to see these 7 women gang up on him and just tear him apart.
Yeah.
From limb to limb.
Well, okay, so at least he was so stupid he left a fucking survivor. Now, how the fuck he didn't notice how many women there were and notice that one of them was missing? He wasn't very bright.
He drinks quite a bit.
Yeah, he was drinking a lot. And he probably was like, couldn't really tell them apart. He wasn't looking that closely. You know? Maybe
he ran out of t-shirts too. Maybe he was kind of the woman, who knows, but like...
Who knows? But he lost track. And Cora was a fucking badass. I mean, just wait till you hear, like... So, you know, she's the only witness. So so the police come. Oh, and on this, I think on the same date, or at least of the same month, in July 1966, there were all these race riots in Chicago. So the National Guard was there. There were like 118 arrests. It was all this sort of civil rights unrest in the city. They'd blocked some of the streets off because the National Guard was there. So it was a mess in the city. So that kind of just made, the city was already kind of on edge, and then this happened. So the first detective on the scene, they find all these dead girls. They're all strangled. Some of them have been strangled with stockings. The knots look professional. They find semen. They find fingerprints. They find blood-soaked T-shirts. All the girls were partially nude, at least. So meanwhile, this fucking piece of shit is roaming the city. He's going between these like flop house motels and bars, basically.
He didn't leave.
Lots of people saw him. Nope. He didn't leave the city. He could have walked out of the city, but I don't know if he had some money on him. He had the money that he stole from these women, but instead he goes to the goddamn bar. So, he's walking around the city drinking, basically, and doing drugs, and the police are getting a description from Cora, and this is such a fucking nightmare case that they have, the homicide department has to bring in, they have to enlist help from other departments, like I think maybe other precincts, and then like the burglary, the guys who work in burglary have to come in and help. So they kind of basically start combing the city, because they kind of figure like they start from this townhouse and they just sort of start working their way out. And I don't know what they knew about him that made them think maybe I know what it was. They just thought he was going to skip town. Duh. So they kind of start like, what would be the fastest route out of town? So they just sort of start going that way and asking, like, seeing if anyone's seen anyone fitting this description that she gave, right? So one of the places they go to this gas station where like a lot of like hoodie, shady types hang out. And they ask if this guy had seen anybody match his description. And he does remember a guy who'd been in there who'd asked if he could leave his bags there, which is so bizarre. Like, that's such a bizarre detail. Richard Speck had come into several gas stations and asked if he could leave his bags there. And like, that must have been a thing that you would just like, I mean, can you imagine going to a gas station and asking if you leave your suitcases there?
No, I don't really like it. I don't like giving those cards at gas stations. Like, hey, you have your Speedway card? Like, no, I don't want you to know who I am.
Gas stations like a lot more trustworthy or something. But like leaving your bags there, I mean, I don't know. It's really weird. But anyway, so this guy did remember him, and he also remembered that the guy that he'd seen had been mumbling something about that damn ship. So with that detail, they go to the Maritime Union Hall, and somehow somebody kind of remembers this guy who was upset because he had lost this job, Anyways, miraculously, they somehow fish this like job slip or something out of some trash bin or something. And I mean, it had only been the day before. It's not that miraculous, but they fished his name out. Now they have his name. So they have the name Richard Speck. They actually they also have his address, which was really his sister's address. And they try to get him to come. They try to lure him to the Maritime Union Hall by getting. This is so weird because I don't quite understand how this works. But they call around bars to look for him, to tell him that there's a job there. And he actually calls back at one point. That must have been it. He called back at one point, but I don't know how if he called back, they didn't know where he was. Do you know what I mean? Like the police are like at this place, and they've got the guy from the Union Hall calling around for him, and he actually called back. I'm probably going to trace the call that quickly. No, but I mean, like they called him. They called the bars.
Maybe they're calling the bars or the flop houses, and then they say, "Hey, you got a call from the box.
Give him this message." So somehow they didn't know where he's calling from, which is just so weird. But anyway, he does call back, but the Union Hall guy who was calling fucked up and gave he was in on it, but he stupidly gave the name of a ship that Richard Speck knew had already shipped out. So now he knew it was a ruse, and he didn't come in. So obviously they didn't catch him that way. So he's still hanging around town, but he decides to move to a different part of the city. So he gets a cab. He goes up north. He actually gets dropped off at Cabrini Green, which every time I hear Cabrini Green, I just think of Candyman. Yeah. Anyway, and a woman at Cabrini Green notices him because he is the only white guy there, and he stands out, and he's carrying suitcases, and later she was able to give a description of him. So he doesn't do anything at Cabrini Green. He just walks from there to this shitty motel, gets a room. So he's hanging out drinking, and while he's there, he takes some woman back to his room, and then she leaves later. I think he passes out. She leaves later, and on her way out of the motel, she says to the woman at the desk that that guy, he has a gun on him, which I guess was against the motel rules. So anyway, this is really, really weird. At some point, the police come to this motel, and I can't quite remember shit. I didn't write it down. But anyway, somehow he talks to the police at some point, but they don't have his name. Oh, it's because of the gun. So there was there's this complaint that he had a gun, and the police come, and they're talking to him, but at this point, like, because the precincts didn't talk to each other, and there wasn't like an all points bulletin for this name, they talk to him, they look at his ID and everything, and he's like, I don't have a gun, and they're like, he's harmless, and they leave.
So clearly he's white. We know that. So
I mean, yeah, seriously, what the fuck?
I mean, I hate throwing around the phrase white privilege, but my
Jesus
God.
Christ. I mean, they're looking
He's a drifter with a gun in Chicago.
And he fucking... I mean, I don't know how widespread the description of him was at that point, so maybe they didn't have the description of him, but there was a description of him that was out. I think at this point, like, he moved to a different part of the city, and that precinct didn't know this yet. This had just happened. So, but what a fucking coincidence.
He's got a gun, but...
Yeah. So in the meantime, they get a picture from him from, like, the Union Hall. I guess he'd had to have some ID or something. They have some picture on file of him. And then the other weird catch is that there was an airline strike at this time. So they have these fingerprints in the house, but they don't have any... They're trying to match them up. So they call, like, Texas. They knew he'd been in Texas. And then the FBI... I guess also had fingerprints. Why would the FBI have had fingerprints? I don't know. Because he was wanted in Texas, maybe? I don't know. But anyway, it took a while for them they had to send hard copies, of course, of the fingerprints. And it took them a while to find an airline because all the fucking airlines were on strike. So, I mean, what a crazy fucking time this was.
So how'd they catch him?
So... Really interestingly, he meets up with two bums that are living in, like, this rooming house that sounded like it was basically these cubicles with cots, and they were, like, covered with chicken wire, and it was just, like, the worst place in the world. And he's just, like, drinking, and he starts talking to them about, like, jumping on freight trains, and, like, they are like, I mean, they're like fucking hobos out of a movie.
Goes back
like,
to trains again.
Jump on the goddamn trains.
Circle.
So he's like, I want to get on a train and get out of here. And they're like, well, we're gonna.
A woman like my mom.
They were like day laborers, and they were like, yeah, you know, we're gonna go tomorrow. They keep putting him off. He's giving them the creeps, by the way. Like he's talking.
Hey, want to
he
get a train?
keeps talking to all these people during this time. Like all these people are seeing him, and you know. Yeah, I mean, what an idiot. So anyways, then the newspapers are coming out, and they have plastered his face, his name, everything. Like, he is in the news at this point. And so he goes, buys a cheap bottle of wine, smashes the bottle, uses the broken glass, slits his wrists. Then he's, like, laying in his cot, and he's, like, bleeding out, but he's calling to his friend, the hobo guy in the next cubicle thing, and he's like asking him to bring him water. And the guy's like, no, fuck off. And then finally, like, he's like seriously irritating this guy so much that the guy's like, you know, God damn it. So he goes over there, and Richard Speck's laying there just covered in blood, bleeding all over the place. So the guy's like, oh my God. He goes down to the front desk. He's like, this guy's bleeding out. They go down to the basement of the motel and get the maintenance man. I don't know why. Now, why would you get the maintenance? I mean, I feel like nobody in this motel wanted to involve the police. Probably.
Like, well, whatever happens, we're going to
They're like, he's probably got some, yeah, exactly. we know, I don't know what else we're going to need, but a mop is on that list.
We all have an equal medical acumen here, so bring the guy with the mop.
God. So anyways, so somebody calls an ambulance. So they get him in the ambulance. He's bleeding out. They stabilize him. They take him to the hospital. Not the hospital that the nurses worked at. It was a different one. But wouldn't it have been a horrible
last
coincidence?
house on the left-esque.
Yeah, well, so the interesting thing is they're there. They're sewing up his wounds. His one arm was like superficial wounds, and the other was he'd really opened a vein. But anyway, he's in the hospital. He's getting sewn up, and they're in the descriptions that are in the newspaper and on the news. They've also described the tattoo because, of course, like Corazon had seen it. And so this doctor, this resident, he sees this guy's tattoo, Born to Raise Hell. And he goes out in the hall and he gets the cops and says, you're not going to fucking believe this, but you got to come in here and look at this guy. And they go in and they look at his tattoo, and they're like, they look at him and he matches the description. They're like, what's your name? And he's like, I want water. And they're like, what's your name? And he's like, Richard Speck. Because he's like, you know, the jig is up. You got me. So they arrest him.
Was he showing like signs of remorse at this point? Shame?
He claimed he didn't remember anything.
But he cut his wrist.
Yes.
Wait, was he drinking during the robbery? I didn't get
Oh, yeah. I don't think he was drinking during it, but he was drinking all fucking day. I mean, he was real drunk. But I think he was one of those people who didn't ever act drunk. I mean, he was like a true alcoholic.
4 or 5 hours. That's a long time.
Maybe he was drinking during during the whole thing, but I'm not sure. I think he was also like on speed. Like he was on a lot of shit.
I felt like he must have enjoyed it.
He would take some kind of pills called Redbirds or something, which to me sounds like some kind of uppers. Yeah. I don't know. So he was on a bunch of shit. He loved drugs. He loved drugs and alcohol. Anyway, yeah, he didn't really show any remorse. He basically said he had blacked out. He didn't remember it. And they of course he got a psych eval in jail, and he actually the psychologist that was like working with him, the things I kept reading are kind of creepy. Like he kind of almost felt like it was one of those things where he was sort of Dr. Phil, kind of like pretending like he had been concerned for his psyche, but he was really just sort of making a name for himself. I don't know, creepy. But one of the things the psychologist or the jail psychiatrist or psychologist, or whatever, encouraged him to do was to paint. So the first thing that he paints in jail is a cougar, and the psychologist is like, maybe you should paint something gentler because that's not good for your image. So he paints a picture of Bambi. It's a true story. Okay. So he paints a bunch of pictures in his cell and hangs them up. He actually he's one of those people who like could never get his shit together in his real life, but jail is kind of like good for him because it's like a structure. Like he probably should have gone to the army, because he needed that kind of structure.
Was a sailor,
but he kept getting thrown off the goddamn ships. Yeah, he probably would have been discharged from the army. What am I saying? Anyways, the trial, they had to move it out of Chicago because there was so much press. So it was in Peoria. They, they had fingerprint matches. They had witness testimony from Corazon. And this is pretty fucking badass. She, while she's on the witness stand, they do the thing where they ask her, like, do you see the man in this room?
Yeah.
So rather than her pointing from the witness stand, she gets down off the witness stand, walks over to him, puts her finger right in his face and says, that is the man.
That's awesome.
Yeah, this is the man. She said, this is the man. Guess how long the jury deliberated?
2 days.
49 minutes.
Jesus Christ.
Yes. They found him guilty, and he got the death penalty. So he was on death row in Joliet. And he was really disliked in prison originally. When he was first there, he gets threatened a lot. He was transferred to isolation unit. I think because it was one of those big notorious cases, people like that usually don't do that well in prison, right? I mean, the normal, quote unquote, normal prisoners who were just in there for robbing people's houses or something, who wouldn't rape and murder 8 nurses, didn't like him. Surprise, surprise. So anyways, he ends up getting the job of painting the walls and things, I guess, in the isolation unit. Right. And he's also fermenting raisins and making them into jailhouse booze. So they nickname him the Drunken Painter of Stateville. So later on, he there's appeals, and at some point, one of the appeals, it comes out that the jury, there was something screwed up in the jury selection. Certain jurors were excluded improperly, so they commute it to a life sentence.
What?
Or
Chicago's had some.
It was 100 life sentences, in a row, or something insane, 900 years in prison or something ridiculous. It doesn't matter. So, so here's the interesting epilogue about Richard Speck, and I realize this is probably anyone who spends any time searching crime on the internet probably knows this, but I actually did not know this. In 1996, somebody sent a video to this journalist named Bill Curtis, and the video was made in 1988, but it was sent to him in 1996, at which point Richard Speck was dead. He had died of a heart attack in 1991. But this video was showing, basically, it was exposing the corruption in the prison.
Okay. And
but in the video is Richard Speck, and he and a bunch of other prisoners, they're doing coke. they're drinking, they're smoking, they're sitting around. But the footage of Richard Speck, he's sitting there. He's sitting there with this guy. He's like the guy's wearing sunglasses, and first Richard Speck's like fully clothed. They're sitting there smoking and everything, and then the guy asks him, "You wearing your blue silk panties?" And he's like, "Yeah." And he's like, do you want me to take my clothes off? And he's like, "Yeah." So Richard Speck strips his clothes off. This is all on the internet, by the way. You can just Google Richard Speck prison video, and there he is. And so he takes off all his clothes, and man, he looks like shit at this point. Like, he was never a handsome man, but oh my God. So you would think that the the blue silk underwear that he's wearing was like the worst part of it. But when he takes all of his clothes off, he has big boobs because he started taking hormone treatments in prison. And I mean, I don't know. Maybe he always, maybe he was truly transgendered and always wanted boobs, but I don't think so. I think he adapted to prison life and found a niche where he could survive and not be murdered. And his niche was like prison, queen bee. He was like the property of these other prisoners, and they passed him around, and they smuggled in hormone treatments for him so that he could get these big tits, and he's wearing silk underwear in there. I mean, it's really crazy. And he gives this other guy a blowjob on video. He's doing coke off the guy's thigh. It is just disgusting. But I mean, he looks bad. I mean, he is just, I kind of have to wonder, like, why did they pick him? Like, why, if you were going to make any of these guys into your prison fuckboy, why would it be Richard Speck? He looks horrible. So, but, here is the really interesting part about that video. I mean, that was really horrifying, but they are asking him stuff about his crime. So the guy it seems like it's the guy who's taking the video is asking the questions. But anyway, someone off camera asked him, he says, "Did you kill those girls?" And of course, at this point, Richard Speck had never confessed. He had always maintained he didn't remember what happened. So he says, "Of course I did." And then they said, "How'd you feel after killing those girls?" And he says, "Like I always felt. Had no feeling. If you're asking me if I felt sorry, no." So he was a real piece of shit. And then the other creepy thing that they said, "Why'd you kill all those girls?" And he says,
well, yeah, why?
He says, "Just wasn't their night." I mean, it was...
How did he die?
He died of a heart attack. Died of a heart attack in prison. Good. After spending God knows how many years being basically like, farmed around by these other guys in prison and fucked by these guys in prison.
Wasn't their night, huh?
So he does say on this video, he says, turns to the one guy he's sitting next to. But there's at one point, at the point where the guy tells him to take his clothes off and shows his silk panties, he looks up for a second when the guy says something, and he does not look like, he looks kind of scared. I really would like to think he was being, not that you wish things on people, but like in his case, like you don't wish that he was having a good time in prison. But
maybe he wasn't.
I hope he wasn't. But on the video he says, and he's like, he is doing a lot of drugs and stuff in the video, so he was possibly having some fun, but I hope he wasn't having too much fun. But he did say in the video, he says, "If they knew how much fun I was having, they'd turn me loose."
Well, speaking of
but
fun,
I think he was bluffing. I think he was having a horrible time. I think he was he was a prison bitch. So anyway, that is the horrible fucking sordid tale of Richard Speck, which was like way more detail than I ever knew.
It's one of those things. There's so many details, and I got kind of quiet during this because at some point I can make so many jokes about.
It's hard to make it light. I know. It's like almost like as I was researching more, I'm like, fuck, why did I pick this to talk about? It's so dark.
I need a third person here to kind of be a buffer zone almost, because like I'm just waiting for I don't know. I just picture the nurses in there having a little silly conversation.
Oh my God.
He's dreamy, but I think he's gonna kill us.
No, I don't think they were thinking he was dreamy at all. I think really, like, I just they were these sweet, I mean, they were like, I think the oldest one was 24. They were in their early 20s. And, you know, they were just, God, what a fucking nightmare.
I mean,
but
I guess how to avoid this kind of thing. I mean, I think we kind of got into it, but Jesus fucking Christ.
Well, I mean, I think if someone's coming in and threatening you, I don't know. Like, I would like to at some point talk to, like, I don't know who could answer this, but maybe some detective or somebody would know. Like, is it a good idea to cooperate with someone who's threatening you, or is it a good idea to try to run or fight? Because my instinct at this point, my feeling at this point is you should probably try to fight.
Well, there's different scenarios though too. Like, let's say you have your kids with you. If you have kids, I mean, then you need to protect them. You need to do certain things in certain situations. Here, I'm not saying it's every man for himself, but like, know your exits, which is a good theme that I have with these mass things. But I mean, really, you've got 3 Filipino women who have a tight bond. I feel like they were on the same page. Then you have 4 white women who just were dumb as rocks. And if they had worked together here,
they weren't dumb. I think they had just been raised to be cooperative and polite, and that's kind of what they thought was going to get them out of this. I mean, and they were thinking they were trying not to piss him off. They could tell this guy, they probably knew he'd been drinking. They could probably smell the alcohol. He was probably oozing alcohol out of every pore at this point. You know, they're God, and they were from good homes, so it wasn't like they grew up in some sort of, you know, rough neighborhood. But I actually think the women from the Philippines had kind of grown up in a rough neighborhood. They were more familiar with, I mean, crime was more of a real thing to them. And that's possibly why they were like, this guy's up to no fucking good.
Yeah, but once he's tying them up, they have a chance to get him. Then there's 7 of them. That's
yes,
the thing.
That was when they should have rushed him. Because he actually didn't even have the gun in his hand. Because he needed 2 hands to tie them up.
Plus, if the exit's downstairs and it's unlocked, it's really easy to get downstairs quickly if someone's chasing you. I mean...
Well, here's what I wish would have happened. I wish that the Filipino women would have communicated with each other in Tagalog. Am I saying that right?
Probably not.
Well, I'm sorry. Forgive me. It's one of those words I've read a million times. I've never heard it, so I'm probably just saying it wrong. But anyways, would have communicated in language that Richard Speck wouldn't have understood and said, like, on the count of 3, we're going to jump this fucker. And just jumped him while he was tying up the first woman. And then, you know, they could have grabbed that gun and just shot him in the head. I don't know. You like to think that that's what you would do, but who knows? I mean, I just know I being this familiar with this story now, like, oh my God, I think if this happened to me, I would be fighting to get out of there.
But they weren't actually trapped there, though, too. I mean, they could have run for the exit as
They could have. I mean, they were scared. He had a gun.
He had a gun.
And a knife. And he was kind of a big guy.
The knife makes it hard for the close quarters combat, though. Like, if you attack him, the knife is probably worse than the gun.
The gun was, ironically, he never used the gun. But the gun, I'm sure, was what really scared them. But, oh my God, I mean, what an evil piece of shit he was. I mean, he went methodically through and violently violated and murdered these women in like a complete rage kind of killing. I mean, this was like, you know, this was not a, you know,
you say it was planned, but I mean, I'm sure there was some loose plan. But
it wasn't like he planned it out for a long time. I think he was full of rage. He was full of booze. He was already kind of, you know, a rapey guy. He'd already raped several people, and he was violent as shit. And he was just pissed, and he saw those nurses earlier in the day, and he just wanted to fucking kill things, and he did.
Would have been 7 doctors, though. I mean, 7 doctors that were men in the 1960s.
I mean, clearly women, the women seemed like easy targets. I don't think that he was a guy who was like a real brave guy. I think he, you know, had he not been drinking, he possibly wouldn't have had the, you know, the bravado to pull it off, but... Oh my God. I mean, when you think about all these like sort of famous, I mean, he's not a serial killer. I think he's actually probably, this would be classified as like a mass murder because he's not a serial killer. He did this all in one night, and it's not even a spree killing. It was all in one night and all in one place. This is why this is such an unusual crime. I mean, they actually called it the crime of the century when it happened. Some reporter or somebody called it that. And there's a book about it called The Crime of the Century, which I read, which was pretty good. interesting. But, oh my God, it's really bad. It kind of, it's when you read about things that happened like, 40 years ago, it's kind of like, oh, they seem kind of quaint or whatever. It's like, oh, that was it. But then you start reading, you're like, holy shit, this was one of the worst crimes this crime is crazy. And it really shook people up at the time, I'm sure. Can you imagine? I mean, that's just a nightmare. So, anyway.
Well, yeah, I mean, really, the worst thing about it, too, is they lived through so much of it, though. I mean, this is torture porn. This is, I mean...
Oh, it is.
When Ted Bundy went on his rampage in the dormitory in Florida, he was hitting people on the head when they were asleep with a hammer.
Right. And even some of the other big, heavy hitter, big name guys like Jeffrey Dahmer, he drugged all his victims first. No, that was not saying he was better or worse. I'm just saying, yeah, Richard Speck made no attempt to knock anyone out. Well, that was the other thing that's kind of amazing. Like, he was pretty brazen. I mean, there's 7 people there that are able-bodied and they could jump you and you are assuming they're not going to. Like, I feel like he actually wasn't very fucking smart and he just got lucky, so to speak, because they didn't fight back. But I mean, yeah, if he was thinking, he would have knocked them all out at first or tied them up immediately, but he didn't.
Didn't need to.
So
it's inspired a lot of bad movies too. Most of them are. Really? Yeah.
What do you think? Was inspired by it?
Well, there's been 2 movies made about him at least.
Oh, yeah.
Directly. And one starred Corin Nemec of Parker Lewis as Richard Speck, which is perverse. But the one that had the best reviews is called 10 to Midnight, starring Charles Bronson, which was made, I think, in the 70s.
Huh.
Yeah. But wasn't about it, but was mirrored the situation. The thing is, I wouldn't want to watch a movie about this either.
Oh, God. No, it's brutal. I'm telling you, not that any of these are really that fun to read about, but somehow this was just it was just relentless. The only thing I kept thinking was, but that one woman survived. And that was the best part about it.
Right now.
She's alive and she's lived a good, happy life. And she didn't ever do any interviews. She never wanted to make any money off of it. She's lived a quiet, normal life, but oh my God. Can you imagine living through something like that? Jesus Christ.
Well, yeah, I can imagine living through it. I want to live through it. That's fine.
Yeah. So.
It reminds me of that story, Good Man's Hard to Find, a collection of short stories by Tennessee Adams.
Tennessee Williams?
Tennessee Williams, my God. Good friend of Mike Spence. Tennessee Williams.
Tennessee Adams and Mike Spence are hanging out.
Yeah, there's a story in there about, I think his name's the Bandit or the Rascal or something, but basically he's this bandit that's going through the South, robbing people and killing them, and his family has car trouble, and his gang comes up and he takes each family member into the woods one by one.
Yeah, I remember that story.
People come out wearing, the shirts of the family,
Jesus.
But the family isn't really accepting that the kids are dying or that kind of stuff. And
that's a fucking horrible short story.
It's one of the most haunting short stories I've ever read.
It's a bad one. That one, and then that Joyce Carol Oates, that Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been? No, is that what it is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was good though.
God, that was creepy. Anyway, veering off. Nobody's written any short stories about Richard Speck or poems or anything like that.
Actually, Cheap Trick wrote a song about him. The label made them change the name of the song. They call it The Ballad of Richard Speck, but they said it would cause too much controversy, so they changed it to The Ballad of Violent TV.
Wow.
And I believe it was on their debut album.
I remember knowing this name for a real long time, and this is why. My mom told me this anecdote one time about my uncle. You know how in your yearbook it would say underneath your name, in your high school yearbook, it would say volleyball team, and then sometimes they have a little quote about the person, or they'd be president of the chess club or whatever. Mm-hmm. So one of my uncles, under his name, you would have to submit what you wanted there, and he put in for the yearbook Richard Speck Fan Club, and just the so that was not accepted. It was not accepted into the yearbook. But I remember my mom telling that story one time, and I'm like, who's Richard Speck? And she's like, oh, he murdered 8 nurses one time, this horrible thing. He murdered these 8 nurses in a room. So anyway, I was kind of fascinated by that. And I must have been a kid when I heard her tell that story. And So I always kind of knew about it and was always kind of haunted by how somebody could murder 8 people in a room, just one guy. And that's why I want to talk about him, even though it was, 40 years ago.
Still
40
relevant.
years ago. I mean, it's
Because
the how to avoid part.
Well, even today, people still want to avoid being killed in a room by just
People
one guy.
people do, and people do not want to be rounded up in a room and murdered. So hopefully, sometimes history will help you stay alive. You got to study your history books, study these old murders, and learn from them, and then hopefully avoid them.
Also, avoid drifters in general.
Avoid drifters. Yeah,
Good.
he was kind of a drifter.
Some people love drifter sex, but it's a
Ew, no.
yeah, it's a dangerous path. Fuck yeah. Okay.
Should we end it with anything?
No, that was good. Thank you once again for listening to How to Avoid Murder and Other Awkward Situations. If you're listening to this, that means you haven't been murdered, and we've done our job. Make sure you check us out on Facebook at How to Avoid Murder, or online on the World Wide Web at avoidmurder.com. And until next time, stay safe.